Hello, and welcome back to the Company Road podcast, where we help you navigate your career with confidence and purpose and help you bring more positivity into your work. And today we're tackling a topic that many of us probably face at some point in our careers, but few really know how to handle. And that will be around workplace bullying, but also we'll probably touch on a few other things because Anna, my guest, is extremely well versed in how to get the best out of your career, and she's a career and soft skills coach as well. The bullying side of it's an uncomfortable subject. It's one that requires a bit of a strategic approach, and I'm really excited to welcome our incredible guest today, Anna Findlay. Anna, you're a career and soft skills coach, and you help mid-career professionals get unstuck and build the career that they truly want. And you've got a background in human-centered design, passion for emotional intelligence, and you take a bit of a unique approach to career development because you're focusing on self-reflection and empowering people to navigate uncertainty with clarity. You're going to be sharing some of your insights today around how to handle difficult workplace situations and other things, from navigating tricky relationships to dealing with outright bullying, all while helping build a better, more resilient career. It'd be interesting to dive into some of those points. Anna, maybe we just start with a bit about you, and you could tell the listeners what your story has been and how you've got into this type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I started getting into soft skills, career development, was actually by being really terrible at it. In my early 20s, I was pretty horrific at this type of skill set, didn't really know that it was even a skill set you needed. Came out of uni, like very fresh-faced, massive nerd, knew how to get things done, but didn't know how to have all those auxiliary skills that we need in corporate. So I did what any nerd would do, and I started speaking to people who were actually getting ahead and getting roles and building careers, and I could see they were doing something. And so I did a big research project in my 20s and started building those skills myself. And because they're not very naturally occurring to me, I have a lot of strategies and techniques that I've had to build, and I found that it's very easy for me to teach other people.
Okay. Tell me, what was your journey in finding that out over the different parts of your life and career so far?
I guess all the way up to graduating university, the playbook I had was working. And it was like, there's no stupid questions, ask whatever you want, which doesn't apply in corporate. There's a right answer, you either know it or you don't. And that was how life worked. Relationships weren't that important. It was very like singularity focused, like your test results, you as a singular identity, maybe a couple of group projects, which people hated, and then moved into corporate and just found that playbook didn't work anymore. But now it was all about self-advocacy, making like connections, selling your skill set before anyone would actually even allow you to do the work. And I mean that for getting jobs, but also for pitching projects, getting buy-in, influence, working together. But all of these other kind of skills were actually what you needed to build a career, to even get in the door in corporate, to let them get you in the door and hire you, as well as to grow your career. So promotions and those kinds of things as well.
You raised an interesting point there, which is that you might be in the role, but not be in the role, in a sense that people need to be convinced of your capability through the performance of you in that role. So it's not always taken a given because you're the head of this, or you're a designer on this project, or a strategist, or whatever function you're performing. It feels like you almost need to re-instill confidence in other people through every interaction and every moment in your work. So how have you found those strategies playing out? Is it something that is taught a very specific way? Is it something that people just need more self-awareness around? What's helping that?
So I think the first thing is recognizing that it exists. So there's two parts of your career. There's the part that you do, and then there's the part that people see you do. And the second one is equally important to the first one. And I think a lot of like introverts, doers, like my background was in design when I was in corporate, we're very focused on the outcome. We're very focused on getting the work done. And we're so busy doing all the work that we forget that someone actually has to pick up that work. And somebody has to take it on to the next stage. And we have to have the buy-in and we have to have the influence, especially in design, because people don't naturally tend to listen to designers. So we don't have that kind of authority that like maybe an accountant or an engineer would have when they say do it. People might be more inclined to do it. Influence skills are still important, but like specifically for design, you really need it. So basically you end up with all these beautifully formed projects and they don't necessarily continue. And you don't have the buy-in to get into the next stage. And it's the same with your career. Like you've got all these skills, but you don't have the buy-in to get to the next stage. You don't have the buy-in because people haven't seen you. They don't know who you are. They haven't seen your work. When they do see your work, you're not articulating it in a way they can understand the impact and the value. You're getting bogged down in the details. But it's really hard for them to understand. They just tune out. Senior leaders don't know who you are. So all of those things will hold back your projects, but also your career development as well.
Pretty serious stuff then. It's interesting to think about the extent to which you can control your own destiny within a large corporate environment to some extent, and where that might be possible, where it might not be possible. It feels like you can do probably more, or people can be doing probably more to trying to get other people to advocate for them from the work that they do. And that continuity would happen if people were seeing you do great work. Obviously, you get from one project to the next, and you'd be able to get some momentum going, and then people suddenly don't join the dots and they realize that you're in the middle of all of that. It's important to stitch together that sphere of influence, it feels, but it's not something that if you're just doing a job, you would necessarily be aware of the whole time. So how do people move from one state of being quite insular and focused on the task to building that sphere of influence, do you think?
I think it's a couple of things. So people who are very good at doing the job often get very busy and they feel they don't have time to do the other piece. But actually, when you make the time to do the other piece, even if it slows down like your tasks, your work will get impact faster because other people will move it through faster. So I think it's reframing from like thinking about tasks and outputs to impact. And then what is the greatest thing I can do to have an impact? And that will sometimes be a task. That will sometimes be a relationship that you need to build. That'll sometimes be a conversation. That'll sometimes be like going back to your group strategy or team strategy, talking to your manager. That'll sometimes be like a weekly check-in where you talk about what you're doing and make that visible. And if that's visible with the right people, it'll get ahead. So I think, reframing the impact and then having a bit of a strategy if it doesn't come naturally to you. So you have to set yourself almost little targets. Like, okay, cool. Who are 3 departments I could reach out to that might be interested in the work that I'm doing? And how do I have those conversations? And like, what's a structure I can play back to my boss? And what are 2 forums I can share the work that I'm doing so that people know that it's happening, which obviously makes them associate the work with me, but also will help me progress the work within my organization. And the larger the organization, the more important that is. Reframing it to impact and then strategy and making it real specific and setting yourself almost like little KPIs outside of your work KPIs. And carving out time as well. Like it's worth the time. It's not that you don't have time. It's that you've got a different set of priorities that maybe not quite as aligned to the impact piece.
Yeah. You say time, because maybe 90% of the impact or the associated impact in relation to those outcomes could come from, 90% of the other people, right? Instead of just your core team, you're going to rely on it spreading through the organization to some extent. And almost self-spreading, which isn't a technical term, but you need it to run by itself beyond a point because you can't be in every meeting and every conversation about it. So if you've stood up a new initiative, then, what are some of the things that can help it succeed? What's going to inspire people? Because I think impact and outcomes, some of that can really help align a lot of other team members in terms of its language. People can get behind it. They can really understand where things are going and what role they would have in its shared success, really. So what do you see working in that space?
So the lesson I've learned very early on in my career, particularly in design, is I went to this really cool project and built this really cool thing. And there was no budget to build it. And we hadn't checked. There was no budget to build it for 3 years. So it was like basically a complete waste of time. And so I start with the end in mind and I check what's the restrictions that we have? What's the budget? Who's involved? Who do we need to actually move it forward if it was to go ahead? What's important to them? What's their KPIs? What's on everyone's to-do list? Like what's top of priority for different heads of, and have those conversations, generally not just for your project, like you should be having them generally. And what's your team's number one priority? How does it link back up to the strategy that you've got as an organization? Whatever that looks like. So having all that in place and then laddering it up so that it can be seen as like a win-win, and getting the buy-in for the end before you start, and making sure that whatever you're pushing forward is not going to be completely impractical in the context that you're trying to build it, I guess is step number 1. And then step number 2 would be like getting them being whoever the stakeholders we need to buy in to actually contribute to the project in some way. Whether that's through, like I did a lot of workshops because I'm like a big facilitation person, but whether that's through like a half-day team in-person workshop where we get together around strategy, like the more that they can contribute to it, the more they feel it's theirs. the less work you have to do to get buy-in because it's already theirs. So they don't think that you're trying to get them to do something that's not theirs. Does that make sense? So I think that all of that stuff is really helpful. And then like regular updates, presenting at the right level for the right audience. That was another hard lesson for me in my early career. Like you want to make sure that you're giving the right level of detail for who they are. So doing some stakeholder mapping, what they care about, what level of detail they would actually want on their plate, and not going into too much detail for people that aren't interested. So that and the communication and circling back, getting people involved at different stages. So yeah, I think really strategizing around your buy-in and your strategic alignment as much as you strategize about the actual thing you're doing.
Yeah, that is all incredibly important, isn't it? If you had to put a percentage on the amount of, just to quantify it in some sort of way, like how much time or effort as a percentage do you think you would need to invest in those sorts of things outside of doing the do on the work that you're doing in your project or whatever it is?
Depends on your level in the organization. So when I was like a junior mid, maybe it would be like 20% of what I was doing. By the time I got to my most senior level, when I was back still in corporate, it was almost 100% of what I was doing, depending on the project. And obviously I had other designers working at that point. So some projects it was 100%, and some projects it was like down to maybe 50, but never less than 50. That was always like a key crucial component of what I was doing.
I feel like that's just often overlooked. Do you see everyone else doing 50 or 100 or 20? Those numbers seem quite big to me. Like, I feel like if you looked around the floor of a typical corporate office, is everyone doing that? Probably not, right?
No, I think not. But I think because not everyone is doing it, if it's something you can align to your key strengths and skill set, which I did, then you become this really invaluable asset. And like for me, I leaned on facilitation a lot. Like I was invited to all like the senior leader strategy days. I planned them, I facilitated them. So I was always like finger on the pulse with exactly what was happening in the organization. Because again, nobody else was doing that. So they saw I could do it. So then I got brought in to do that. So there's an element of it that was just like aligning to what I was very good at. But I think that all projects should have it. And if you're not doing at least 20%, I don't know if you're going to get it over the line, especially in like large corporate government or hierarchical organizations. Like maybe if you're in a startup, scale up situation, like where, the decision maker is on next to you, then maybe it's not going to be that big a part of what you're doing. But large, complex, hierarchical, especially at least 20%. Like otherwise you're not going to get the buy-in that you need.
I'm interested in the point you made around putting yourself into that facilitation role. And in previous posts that you've put out on LinkedIn, you talk a bit about introversion. It's been part of your journey and getting to where you've got to as well. So how has that journey been for you? And what would you say to people that would probably not touch facilitation with a 10-foot pole if they had to, because they feel like it's just not for them? They feel like they would not be well placed to do that if they're feeling more like an introvert, do you think?
Yeah. So I think, again, align it to your natural strengths. So I don't facilitate like an extrovert. And for lack of a better way of putting this, like I don't enjoy facilitating like fun things, like team bonding, build a bike. Like that's a very extroverted energy kind of facilitation that most people would bring to that situation. So my facilitation style is all about the contribution of the other. So the strength that I'm bringing to it is basically listening, which is introversion, and then like pulling the different parts of what people are doing. I do a lot of planning, so like all of my workshops are very structured and planned because again, I'm an extrovert, so I can't really think about it on the spot. It needs to be structured. And they're also very inclusive, so I do a lot of activities to make sure that all different types of thinking styles can come into the mix. And there's not some voices that are drowning out others. So I think that people think that introverts aren't naturally aligned to certain things, and maybe some of you aren't, and that's totally fine. But I think trying to find a way to do things that align to your natural strengths. So pick a couple of things that you are good at and see if you can apply them to different situations. And for introverts, you get listening, reflective, inclusion. Writing is another big one. A lot of my introverted clients, we think about how they can contribute to company newsletters. Can they do a wrap-up email? Because like writing is a strength of a lot of introverts. And again, pick your thing that you think will showcase you in a positive light and do it in a way that is authentic to yourself, where you're not just trying to be an extrovert. Also, if you're a woman trying to be a man, that's another one that comes up quite often. You can do it authentically and leaning into the natural rhythm that you work in, then you'll succeed. If you try and do it as someone else, you'll either burn out or just do a very bad job.
Yeah. No, I think it's encouraging to see that the practices and the nuance around planning of these gatherings really is becoming more sophisticated than maybe it was, because if you rewind even just a few years, and it probably is still happening in some places still today, it's got a very kind of singular, a very typecast version of what a successful workshop would look like, and it's dominated by alpha characters, all the stuff that is, a lot of people would shrug away from. So the things that you were describing in the way that you're designing for inclusive environments and more collaborative situations is really encouraging to see. It feels like people are more tuned into that now, which I think is incredibly positive. So have you seen a big change and a move away from more traditional facilitation styles into something that's a little bit more evolved?
I think, to be honest, I haven't. And the reason is that because so much of what I do is aligning your natural strengths to your environment, I have sought out very intentionally collaborative, like intuitive environments and leaders and teams. And then as I've also grown in my career, I've been able to influence that as well. So if it wasn't there, I just like, we're doing it this way now. And so, yeah, I haven't seen a massive change because those are the environments I've aligned myself to, because they're the environments I operate in more. But with my clients, I definitely see some of them in these environments. And some of them haven't changed, still there. But I think that's where it's really important to recognize the types of environments that you're going to thrive in. We can do a lot to try and move the bar, and I think it is moving, like you mentioned. But there's only a certain amount of bar moving that you can do. If you're in a completely misaligned environment, it's going to be so much easier for you to change your environment than to try and change your environment, if that makes sense.
And it might be a nice segue on to chat around workplace bullying and that kind of thing. It's a bit of a jump, but I'm thinking about, I guess, what we know as people about the other people that we work with, and how we go about not just conducting our work, but actually really understanding the characters and the roles that people play, the hats that people wear. It's difficult when bumps in the road on any project could happen at any time. Some of those things, and most of those things, are actually driven by the people that are within those situations. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts around the awareness that people can have around their counterparts and the people that they have to work with, and what should we be either ignoring or seeing, do you think?
So I think that there's a lot of people in corporate who don't necessarily identify how they feel about a situation and to regulate themselves. So that can be a challenge. Other challenges, obviously, like just different perspectives. People have very different ways of seeing the world. There's a book, I think it's called Surrounded by Idiots, that classifies people into four different colors. And I found like those kinds of classification systems have been quite helpful for me, because I can preemptively classify stakeholders and different people. And then I can appeal to the things that I know would be important to them when I talk to them. Because otherwise you're having two different conversations where I'm talking about logic. I'm a blue person. And they might be talking about feelings. So like so we'll have two totally different conversations. So yeah, a bit of empathy, a bit of understanding the other people's perspective, and then social capital will take you a long way. So if you think about like a bank account, like deposits and withdrawals, like people who you don't maybe naturally mesh with, you may be more likely to avoid. And so you're not putting any social deposits. And so when you need to make a withdrawal or when you have a conflict, there's nothing there. So you end up with these sort of downward spiral relationships. Whereas what you probably need to be doing with people, especially with the people that you might be inclined to avoid, is start to actually make those deposits and build up that kind of trust. And then when you have these misalignments, there's a lot more to work with. And people will assume that you're coming from a positive place because you're not necessarily mates, but you're like acquaintances, and there's a level of trust and understanding that's been built. So I guess preemptively doing that. I also really like team canvas, just to start with tactics at you. So I don't know if you know the team canvas, but I like to proactively get groups that are going to work together to do things like, it doesn't have to be the team canvas, but it can be, before we start projects, so that we can understand how we work together, who's what type of personality, what do they need. And I find that getting ahead of the problem is a whole lot easier than solving the problem. Another thing that I really like is like a work with me guide. And this can be quite good for like longer forming teams, not necessarily project teams that are doing something together. But you can put together like a little guide of how people work with you. Like for me, for example, I work in very focused chunks. So I'm well known for ignoring people on Slack. So I just put that in there. I'm not ignoring you. And I often like get straight to the point and just do a direct ask. I often put that in there as well. Whereas if people are uncomfortable with that, they might. So I would note what they would prefer and be like, okay, I'm going to try and adapt my style. So in terms of the positive stuff that we can do to reinforce the tension, that we can do to build social capital, that we can do to build empathy, those are some of the things that we can do. But the other side of the coin, obviously, there are some people who they don't have the best intentions. And I think that's where all of those things will fall down a little bit, because sometimes we can assume just because we have good intentions, we interact with other people, like we may not always get it right, but we're usually trying. We're usually not trying to be a dick. We're not usually trying to make people feel bad. And so you can start to assume that other people also operate like that. And it's an unfortunate fact of life that for whatever reason, there's a portion of the population that does not operate like that.
There's definitely a confirmation bias, and part of a relationship building in any way is looking for commonality between you and somebody else in the workplace. You think you're all in pursuit of this same common goal, and you might misalign on the way that you're going to do it, but you also might misalign on the direction or the end outcome as well. It might be that somebody's head is in a completely different space. So what are some of the telltale signs for spotting that, do you think?
Spotting when people are in misalignment. For lack of a better way of describing it, it's usually a gut feeling. You'll often be aware, or there'll be like almost like little moments where the ground drops out from under you and you're like, what just happened? You go to a meeting and you think it's going one direction and suddenly like curveball, you're like, okay, I've missed something. Like there was somebody I didn't get on board that needed to get on board. There was a priority I didn't have visibility of. Something is happening, because where did that come from? So ideally, like the groundwork will help prevent these problems. So like starting new projects, new relationships, new teams, putting in that practical groundwork to get people on board, to understand their perspective, to know what's their priorities, what's on their roadmap, what sort of person are there? Have you like built that groundwork? That'll help get ahead of those situations, but they still happen. But you'll be aware of them. It'll be relatively obvious that it's happening. Yeah, when it does, take a step back and be like, okay, cool. Instead of being like, oh my God, that person's so annoying, like they're just like detracting from what I'm doing, you're like, I've missed something. What did I miss? What did I miss?
Yeah. So you can play the role of like inquisitive person and curious person and try and find out what you've missed first. And that might be a way to build sufficient capital with somebody who you might not be on the wavelength with to begin with.
And you don't have to do it necessarily in the moment. Sometimes that's not appropriate, especially if it's like a group or something like that. Afterwards, pull them aside or set some time and be like, look, I really want to understand, like, you said this and this. Tell me more about your perspective. What does that align to? Like, where is that in your strategy? What's your concern with this? And get that kind of what the hell's going on. But obviously don't say what the hell's going on. Come at it like really empathetically and listen. And then if you let them do that talking first, rather than coming to them and be like, oh no, like you need to change your mind and agree with me, you'll have a lot more success if you ask them about their perspective first.
Is there a crossover, do you think, to workplace bullying from this point? Do you feel like it's something that can escalate to that when situations just misinterpreted and understood, things remain unsaid for many weeks or many months, and then all of a sudden you've got a situation where there's a conflict? How do those situations come about, do you feel?
So I think for me, I think about it like testing. So there's lots of different like approaches. So if someone is consistently like dragging down a project or keeps undercutting you in a meeting or is doing a behavior, we'll throw like all the tools at it. So we'll get curious. We'll talk about our ways of working. We'll ask about their ways of working. We'll look at the priorities. And if we do all that and they're still doing it, then we're like, okay, this is not like a positively intentioned individual. This is not a miscommunication. Basically, this is an asshole. And there are people out there that just really enjoy making other people feel bad. It can be a power trip. Sometimes they feel the need to like socially enforce like some of the social rules. So if you're like a strange person, but not actually harming anyone. So like neurodivergent people cop it a lot. People from different cultures cop it a lot. So that kind of thing can happen. And then you have to switch your approach, because then empathy is going to be the worst thing for you. You don't want to like endlessly try and understand them and then change yourself and become a shell of yourself trying to improve the relationship with this person who's basically being a dick. So then it becomes about self-preservation and building other relationships to protect yourself in that social network from the impact of that person. Because if you have enough relationships, you have enough social capital, they usually just leave you alone. They generally are doing it because they feel they have more social capital than you. You don't find many people at like the lower end of the social capital in an organization. Occasionally you do, but they don't last very long. They're the ones that like they'll get rid of them. The ones that are prevalent and stick around are protected by someone or something. Sometimes it's just like a crap culture. Sometimes it's like a particular old school way of thinking, particular manager, particular relationships, but they're protected by something. So you've got to protect yourself. And also, really important to state that if they're so well protected that it's like an embedded part of the culture, probably you won't win that. that
Yeah, yeah.
might be a chance for you to be like, okay, is this actually where I can do my best work? And maybe it isn't.
I think that's a really important point, that last one, because the extent to which you feel you can change, like if you're making all of those efforts to empathize, you found yourself in a hole, you're kind of trying to get closer to the person that you don't want to be with, basically, you don't respect, and you're not learning off them, and you can't see eye to eye on something. To what extent are you realistically going to be able to change something there? It feels like it would be a hard one.
And I think
I
also,
hear this happening a lot within founder cultures where it's just a certain way, it has been the way forever and ever. I may have been a company that's been running for 20 or 30 years, and there's been this kind of notion of, yeah, I guess green shoots and exciting new things happening, but actually it's the same old people behaving in the same way, and it's accepted, and you don't really feel like you can influence that too much beyond a point. You're feeling a little bit powerless. So you can go with the grain, or you just got to get out. That kind of shitty treatment is overlooked. It feels like there would be a point at which you could tolerate it no longer.
yeah, 100%. And also, it's about strength alignments, right? So there are some organizations, some people, some managers who are never going to see you as having any value. They're just like, whatever you do, you're always going to be a bit shit in their eyes for whatever reason. And you start to internalize it. And then it starts to become, you get a bit of a, oh my God, am I shit? And then when you move into your next role, you have to do a lot of like rework to build up your confidence. And I see this a lot with my clients. Like I had a client, she'd been in a role 3 years. She was very good at her role. She was in digital marketing, and her manager just did not like her, didn't want to progress her career. She'd asked for a title change, not even a pay rise, to reflect the job she was doing. And her manager's like, no. And so what we did is we ran some experiments. And so we're like, okay, cool. Can we influence this? Let's try it out. Like I've got, a toolkit. Let's see what happens when we apply the toolkit. It had a hypothesis that nothing would happen, but let's test it out. Because this client came to me and was like, I want help getting a promotion. And I was looking at the situation going, I don't think we're going to get a promotion where you're at because, your value is not recognized there. It's not that you don't have value, but it's not recognized there by the people that it would need to be recognized to progress your career. So we ran the experiments and the hypothesis came correct and the manager was not going to have a bar of it. So then we took her out to the market. She got 3 offers. She got like a 30K salary increase and she's had 2 promotions in the last 2 years. So like sometimes it really just literally is.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, that's
And,
right.
she's way happier now, which is the most important metric, right?
So it's coming back to some of those signals, and I was coming back to the post that you put out on LinkedIn. If anyone listening wants to go and look at it, it's on your profile. 10 types of workplace bully, and how to beat them at their own game, which I thought was very cool, and it's a catchy title, but also very important and simply written as well. It's often like you don't know what to do because you don't really see the clarity of the situation. But I think artifacts like that just really help make that clearer. So for those that haven't seen it, do you want to just explain a bit about that and how you came to create that and, what was behind it?
Actually, what turned me onto this post was I was actually seeing a lot of what I consider to be pretty bad advice circulating around workplace bullies on LinkedIn.
Right.
As I just mentioned, it's something that my clients do often face. Like I work with introverts. I work with quite a few diagnosed neurodivergent people in creative and tech. And they tend to be, I work with migrants. Like I work with a lot of people who tend to be targets for bullies. And so I was looking at a lot of the advice. It was basically like, take a date jar. And I'm like, it's actually not really very good advice. So I thought I would maybe have a crack at having some better advice. And I think it was about understanding where the bully is coming from. So for example, the intimidator, this is a power play. They want you to feel bad. And so then what do you do when someone is like in this power play? It's almost like grey rocking them. I don't know if you've heard that term, but yeah, you don't give them an emotional reaction. Don't come to them and say, oh, I want to understand, because again, no emotional reaction, firm, neutral tone. Because if they can't get an emotional reaction out of you, you become boring and they'll just usually move on. So that's a very different type of person than, for example, the inappropriate joker. And the inappropriate joker is so prevalent in Australian workplaces. Oh my God. It's really like some really inappropriate jokes about like gender or culture or sexuality or like rape jokes. They're really good. And so what do you do? And like women specifically, which is the majority of my client base, will often just laugh like, huh, and absorb the awkwardness impact to themselves. And actually you need to just hold a mirror. So again, don't do a big, oh my God, that's so inappropriate, because then, you're the hysterical person about it and then it becomes the whole thing. But reflect it back and don't react. Just be like, what? Sorry, what? I don't understand. Can you explain it to me? Because when they have to actually explain it, suddenly it's inappropriate to explain the rape joke in your workplace. Who knew?
Yeah.
So
So
there's
so
different tactics.
not by telling a similar joke back. It's more about just asking questions about that thing that has been said.
Yeah, don't laugh,
Yeah.
don't diffuse the tension, pretend like you're an idiot. What do you mean? Like, I had one of my clients, I think someone told her she sounded like a phone sex operator, that was her voice. And she was like, "Oh, I wouldn't know. I've never spoken to a phone sex operator." And the guy was like, "Huh?" I thought that was a good one. But yeah, find a way to, again, don't react. Don't tell them they're being inappropriate. Again,
Yeah.
if you think you would have gone through a process, right? So to have classified this person as a bully, we would have, okay, gone in with empathy, asked their perspective. We might have pulled them aside and said, "Hey, I'm whatever type of person, woman, immigrant, second language, queer. When you say things like that, it makes me uncomfortable, and so I'd prefer if you didn't." Like, we've probably gone through all these tests. If they're still doing it, they don't give a shit. So then it's time to take a different approach.
Definitely. And all of these coming out, not just in kind of colleagues, as I want to call them, but in leaders and in managers and in heads of company of the organization. It can be prevalent throughout, right? You never know when you're going to encounter such characters. So who else do we need to be looking out for?
It's like I said earlier, the people who are engaging in these inappropriate behaviors are usually protected from the social hierarchy. And that can often mean that they're in a position of leadership. Or their buddy is with one of the people in positions of leadership, or they think you're the boss of the company. Maybe they are. And this is one of those situations where I'm very passionate about people's managers being their advocates. If your manager is not your advocate, there is no amount of anything you can really do about it. Like, obviously, we go through the testing, we test, and if we come back and they're not an advocate, your career is going to be severely limited, whether they're bullying you or not. So your manager, very important that they are not exhibiting these behaviors. And if they are, you probably just literally need to find somewhere else, because that's going to be like very career limiting. In terms of the rest of the culture, again, it depends. Is it like one individual? Can you kind of isolate, distance, use some of these tactics? Or is it someone that's like incredibly in your space all the time and influential on the culture? Or is it the whole culture? Is everyone just like this? In which case, do you want to be there? So if it's just one person that you have to interact with sometimes, you can distance yourself from, you can put some of these walls up, these behaviors that they kind of leave you alone, then that's probably something you might better cope with. But when it's your manager or a culture more broadly, like, chances of you changing the culture is very minimal as one individual. And the personal cost would be very high as well.
When do you think in somebody's stay at a company, when do you think that advocacy should make itself known most prominently? Or when do the first promising signs happen usually, do you think?
The promising signs of your manager being your advocate?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
So ideally, when you are in the interview and you start asking about their management style and asking for examples of employees, like who's your top performer, why are they a top performer, start getting out those like nuggets of, okay, you value this and this. Am I someone you're going to value? How do you work? What's your ways of working? When you're going through the onboarding process, again, setting up those check-ins, having those conversations. This is how I work. This is how you get the best of me. How do you work? How do I get the best from you? What do you need from me? And so those conversations, and it's like a massive red flag, by the way, if they don't want to have those conversations. I think that's red flag number one. Okay, cool. So you don't really care about working with me and you're my manager. That's a good start. So yeah, red flags will come up either through them not having answers to those questions, not wanting to engage in those conversations, or through the conversations themselves. And some of them, again, you've got to test it out. You've got to get curious. Got to be like, okay, maybe you need that. What do you mean by that? Why that? Why that? And if you've gone through all the kind of iterations of empathy and trying to meet them in the middle, then you know where you've ended up. And you've got a lot of confidence as well. Because sometimes when this is happening, you can start to think, is it me? Am I crazy? Especially if you've got someone who's gaslighting you or whatever. So like doing the tests and having those little learning checks of, if I change this, if I do this, if I ask this, does anything change? And like often it will. If it's a person with a good intention, then it will. But it will give you a lot of confidence that you've reached the right conclusion without making assumptions, if they're still doing it and you've gone through all the steps.
Yeah, because I don't think you can underplay the fact that in those situations, often you just feel alone. You don't necessarily always have that one person at work, particularly if it's a new workplace. You don't know the people there very well. So you're relying on either your own intuition or a very kind of helpful shoulder to cry on at home or with family or friends outside of that situation, but they don't know the situation either. So how do you suggest people best manage that element of support or self-care through that time?
Yeah, there's lots of levels to that. So I think when you start a new role, you should ask for a buddy that's a pair level, ideally, and then build out other pair relationships. So that should be one of your primary focuses when you start, so that you do have that kind of, they are reacted like that. Is that what's, and you can have those kind of conversations, which you can't have with necessarily people that you report into or more senior. So that can be a really important part of building your support system as a starting point and having those kind of conversations. And again, it doesn't have to be like a bitchy thing. Oh my God, they're so right. It's not. I was in a conversation with Alex and he did this. Have you, do you have any insight around like why that happened? I wouldn't have expected it. Was that his style? Does that happen to you? What should I do about it? Those kind of conversations. So I think that's step one. Step two is probably building your internal confidence. And I think this is most important when you are someone from a minority group. So you're a woman or you're queer, you're an immigrant or whatever it is. You probably experience like sexism, homophobia, right? Finding communities that have also experienced that so that you can ruminate with them is also helpful. But like working on your own self-confidence in whatever way you need to do that. So I do a lot of mantras. I do a lot of hypnosis, meditation, therapy. Like therapy, it's a good idea. We should all be doing it. So yeah, working on your sense of self and your sense of confidence. It will help a lot. It'll help you identify what healthy behaviors look like. It'll help you with healthy behaviors aren't being, and you won't necessarily internalize it and think that you're the problem, especially if you're not. It'll give you more emotional regulation skills to have these conversations, to help other people regulate their own emotions if they're not able to do that. So that's important. And then, yeah, just community, whether that's your friends, partner, people from similar backgrounds, outside of work or inside of work. Like some workplaces, they have groups for different people. Like when I was working at Endeavour Group, they had a club for queer people. Great, people could go join that. When I was in the ATO, they have a neurodiversity network for neurodivergent people. So like peer support groups, really helpful, where you can feel like you're being understood.
Some really great suggestions there. Thank you for sharing that. In a situation where you can do all of that, but still feel like there's not really much you can change about your situation, like if that support infrastructure isn't there, and it gets to the point, you mentioned gaslighting before, but you're heading into self-doubt and you're wondering whether there's any choice or whether you just need to conform with what's being put in front of you, that there must be a lot of people out there that have just found themselves in a situation that they have to just fall in line with what's happening and stick it out for a few months until they can find something better. But for that period, it's just really horrific for people to endure that level of misalignment and just disrespect in a lot of cases. So for those sort of times, what would you recommend there?
So quiet quitting, it's the term that's used a lot. Something along the lines of quiet quitting. Remove your energy, toe the line, care factor reduced as much as possible. If you've got leave or something like that, maybe take a couple of days, go and sort out your medical appointments, take a Friday off for that appointment that you have. Just emotionally distance yourself and give yourself some space, which will also be really helpful to use on your job hunt because you'll be probably looking for new roles. But I think the biggest kind of thing that you can do to prepare for the situation before it even happens is make sure that you've got a really strong understanding of your value in the market, how to sell yourself, you've got a good network, so that you don't really feel like you have to stick around. You're going to be able to more easily move if you're in a situation that's not suiting you. And not to go too financially advisor either, but having a bit of a buffer, if you're financially able to, can also be helpful. They call this fuck you money. You're like, no, fuck you, I don't want this job. So yeah, having not that you necessarily have to walk away, but sometimes just knowing that you could will free up a lot of that emotional energy, knowing that you've got options, knowing that if you apply for 10 roles this week, one of them's definitely going to call you back because you know exactly what the market is for your skill set, you know how to talk to it, you've connected in with your network, like all of those skills, they're really helpful and they mean that you don't have to feel stuck. But yeah, in terms of while you're stuck there, while you're still there, quiet quitting, care factor zero, try and take time off, make space. With clients, it depends on their situation. Sometimes like things are more possible than others, but we'll usually put together a bit of a plan around like, how do we survive? Can we survive? It's always a trade-off. Is it better to stay? Generally speaking, of course, it's always better to stay and have a job when you're looking for a new job because that makes it a lot easier to get a job. But I've had clients who have just quit and then gone and had a few months off and gone back and looked, and because they literally just couldn't. It was not going to be the best option for them to stay.
Yeah.
So, generally speaking, if we can try, we can quiet quit care factor down, make some space, and move on.
So you take it out of gear. Not everyone can rechannel their energy positively in that moment. The walk away does obviously happen. You need the time and space to reconsider your options, and it's all too clouded at that point. So I totally get that. Interesting, really good pointers. And what about from a leader's point of view? So if they're noticing things within their teams and there's a team member, it's in the dynamics of the team, but have you experienced anything like that where the leaders are having to intervene and almost bring some of their team members in line? It's not quite performance management, but it's that there are some issues there that needs to be addressed from some of the toxic behaviors that are presenting. Is there anything there that leaders can learn from your approaches?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that unfortunately it's quite rare for leaders to do this, but I think there's a couple of things in it. So as a leader, the behavior that you model is the behavior that is accepted. So I would first, if you're seeing it in your team, and also obviously check leadership above you as well. Like, where is this? Why have they decided that this is acceptable? Sometimes they're just a lone wolf decided it's acceptable, but usually it points back to something. And so you're like, okay, cool. Like, we need to address that. But then if it's just the individual, obviously, like, they will continue to behave like that unless somebody stops them. So it has to be made unacceptable. And then again, start with the same exact approach. Come in with empathy, with understanding what's going on. I've noticed that you're doing this. And then if it becomes apparent that they don't give a shit, then you have to move into more of, I want to say, like enforcing this is not acceptable. If it continues, this will be the repercussions. And as a leader, you're actually well positioned to actually do the thing that I said to avoid in this post, which is take HR into the equation, because that is literally like your job and also their job. And if you say there's a problem in your team with this team member because of the hierarchical structure in the corporations, it's quite likely that will be taken seriously. Whereas if an employee says that about a colleague or a manager, it may or may not be taken as seriously because of the social structure. And again, the bullies are protected by someone or something.
All right. Thanks so much, Anne. I really enjoyed the chat. And as we wrap up, I think what's been refreshing in this chat is that we've been able to talk quite informally about some really serious things, which is always like helpful to do just to vent and clear the air a little bit. But for people out there, they might be grappling with some of these things. They might be observing some of those behaviors and characters that we've been describing today. So if it is a little bit more serious, they might have a question. Where would be some of the resources that you would go to for any of those people that just need some help? And maybe how would they contact you as well if they had a question?
Yeah, resources for help. Again, I have some posts on LinkedIn. I don't really have a repository where I would recommend them going to off the top of my head, unfortunately. But in terms of if they did want to contact me, LinkedIn is my best channel. I live there. So yeah, send me a DM. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I will also republish the bullies thing in case anyone's looking for that. So I'll pop that back up in a more findable location than a month ago. Pretty share that as well with a couple of initial tips. But yeah, this information is not very well known. I think that's part of the problem. And there's not that many other people that I see teaching it.
No, that's it. And I think with the topic, it feels like these matters are often resolved behind, carefully guarded walls and doors. So it feels like for having a more public conversation, it can only benefit people for them to be aware of this, but it's not always possible. So I really appreciate your time and your honesty in having this conversation today. Thanks so much, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Lovely to chat.
Thank you.